saved their lives. It is what it is. And again, I'm not advocating for the political agenda. I advocate for the campers, the people who need help. And so it was really hard to navigate, to watch all of that happen. Because I tried to help on that level, I had some of that politics dumped on me, said I was in charge of it and stuff. And so that it created even more confusion in our community when we really needed to come together cohesively. Go ahead.
Do we have any safe parking lots, or what's your opinion on that?
We don't have a safe parking program. Safe parking programs are something that are all over the nation. Tiny home villages are all over the nation too. They work great. We've got a few of those here in our town. A parking program is something that I'm currently, we started a new nonprofit after last year's big camp out because we wanted to fill the requirement the government had. They were asking for an entity to sign on the dotted line to be the entity who's responsible, to be liable for the camp, whatever the camp looked like, so that the city wouldn't have to be liable for millions of dollars if somebody sued them. They would sue that nonprofit. So I volunteered to be that nonprofit. We formed a nonprofit so that we could be the entity to sign on the dotted line. With what we were asking for was the government to provide the land, the shelters, the startup money for it, everything, but to let us do that, and because this is key. This is key from my perspective, okay? And I've been pushing this, and part of 80% of what I do in homeless advocacy is to try to change the conversation on homelessness, because there's a lot of misinformation. The way we think about homelessness, you know, there's this othering that we do. They're over here and we're here. It's like, no, we're all together. This is community, and it's that easy to fix. I really believe that. But where was I going?
Well, parking lot.
The
really
parking,
wanted
the parking program. So we would like, we're, the nonprofit I formed is called SOS, Serenity Outreach Services. I'll try to leave a few cards behind here too. Serenity Outreach Services does exist to try to fill these needs. Our goals are to try to identify where the gaps are in services and see if we can get them filled. If we can't get somebody else to fill them, then we try to fill them, show them how. So that, okay, well, this is what works. Can we get somebody paid to go do that now? You know, kind of thing. So that's how we work, and a parking program is much needed. Right now, this last winter, we had Bellingham Police towing, I don't know, I'm going to say in excess of 20, 25 vehicles where people were living in them, okay? And we were in a pandemic. Is parking a problem? Yes, it is. Does stuff spill out onto the roadway? Yes, it does. People throw stuff out. There's garbage. There's the waste tanks in an RV. And some people is like, well, my waste tank is full. And they walk outside and they pull the lever, and guess where the waste goes? Right out on the street.
Happens in boats too. People are living on boats, and they're dumping it into our waters. So it's,
The true cost in all of our community, the garbage, everything else. Nobody's providing the dumpsters for them, outhouses, hand washing stations, you know. I mean, so there's some little token here and there, but when we put out dumpsters, we find that the housed community often will stuff them with, you know, well, we're moving, and if you're going to give that dumpster to the homeless, I'm going to fill it with construction materials or a couch or you know, whatever it is. And so then they take the dumpsters away, and that's like punishing the homeless people for that again. They still don't get the access. So it's, again, this is a community issue. You have housed communities that are causing that problem.
Yeah, I also wanted to share something that happened. I had recently had COVID around right after Christmas, New Year's, and as soon as I got better, I found out that one of the tiny home communities had an outbreak of COVID. And since I had just gotten better, I decided I was going to go there and cook for everybody, because they said, please, we need a hot meal. Everybody's tired. Nobody can cook. So I ran down there, and the guard at the gate's like, you don't want in here. We have COVID. I said, I know, that's why I'm here. And I started to cook. Well, I hadn't met a lot of these people because I hadn't been there in a long time since the pandemic. So one woman comes in, and she could be your grandma and totally normal, dressed really nice, hair looks good. And I'm like, how come you're here? I said, what did you retire from? You know, she's like, I'm retired. I said, from what? She says, life. Turns out she had lung cancer. And she had to spend all of her house money on her medicine, on her treatment, and she was still alive, thank God, but she lost her home. And she was found on the street and she was brought in, and she was able to still get treatment and have her own little tiny home, which her tiny home is basically a bedroom. Yeah, you guys.
So like, what's the percentage of people who like just have like they don't have enough money to like have a house and have do like their treatment and everything? Like I can't tell you like the percentage.
How many people are out there because they're sick?
Yeah.
Because of ill health, and can we lump elderly in with that too?
Yeah.
People who are just like, yeah, I would be housed, except I have, and elderly usually have medication. I'd say that that number is going to be really close to 35%. And I'm just kind of spitballing that, you know. But like I said, when you're looking at around 18 to 20% of severely mentally disabled people, and an additional group like that, it starts to stack up these demographics. Some people are there because they had some legal actions taken against them. They did a couple drunk driving incidents, and then they ended up in jail, and then they get out of jail and they have nothing. You've lost your home. You still got your car, maybe.
No, they usually lose your car at the
whatever
UI.
it is, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and so they just can't recover, even
Yeah.
with today's wages, just to get a starting level job. You're not going to be able to come up with the first, last, and deposit on an apartment without a leg up from somewhere most often. And this just plummets people into houselessness. Let alone the fact that we've got this pandemic that exacerbates all those issues, makes it 10 times harder in each case. Yes.
Are some shelters like picky about who can live there?
Think about what?
Picky.
Shelters picky about who can live there? Like if you have a
We call that barriers, like different barriers of sheltering. So all of the shelters in Bellingham, Whatcom County have barriers. There's no zero barrier. Zero barrier is like you can come in drunk, you can come in high, you can come in as you are. And we don't have that. And it's when we have an emergency shelter open up and there's snow on the ground and the county says, okay, the conditions have been met, 28 degrees and below is one of the triggers. Severe weather events like the floods should have triggered emergency sheltering, but they didn't. But stuff like that is supposed to trigger these events. And that's when, you know, if you have to have a cop in the room, you have to have a cop in the room, but everybody gets to come in. You sleep on a mat on the floor, everybody gets some food, some coffee. And because a polite society doesn't let anybody die on the sidewalk. Right.
did the population of homeless people increase when the flood started?
Oh, yeah. They actually filled up Unity Village. Any tiny homes that were left, some families came in just to get help. They also, a lot of people drop off supplies to donate that Unity Village holds and stores, and so does SOS. And they have a storage unit to hold these supplies, and they were all like taking all the blankets and all. I mean, there are people right now that I work with that they are still living in their house, even though it's really uninhabitable because of like black mold and all these different water issues, but they have nowhere to go and they don't have the money to move out or to pay for a hotel room. And during the pandemic, and actually just recently, even if you could get a hotel voucher to go to a hotel room, because of the pandemic, everybody was shipping their family member into a hotel room and keeping them there so the rest of the house didn't get sick. So our hotels were completely booked. So we couldn't even help people who needed help.
There was a lot of people who could afford a motel for a stopgap who were also effectively homeless, and those people are in hotels right now and they're still filling them up. Also, before we take any more questions, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about barriers and how that works. So, like the base camp, Bellingham Missions base camp, it's what's called a low barrier shelter. Some people are definitely not allowed in there. They're too disruptive, they're violent, or whatever, and they never have a cop on the floor in there with them either, or a security person in there like that. So the way they run it is that people who don't work well with our group are asked to leave. Or they're trespassed, and sometimes it's for a number of days. There's offenses. If you come in here with a marijuana cigarette, 30 days, you can't come in again. You could be a really nice person and you came in with a marijuana cigarette. I'm not saying either way about marijuana cigarette. I'm saying that if you have it, You've got 30 days. If that 30 days is in February, that could kill you. So it was a real mistake to have brought in that joint. A full bottle of alcohol with the seal still on it can catch you 30 days or more. Different, a fight between, you think fights don't happen, in a congregate facility with people who are, of course they do. And when that happens, then you're looking at 60 to 90 days out, all winter. So there's got to be alternatives for these people. There needs to be, and more structure. Of course, these fights happen in congregate environments, but if you have a tiny home village, Homes now found that a tiny home village operates best at about 25 people. You can house 25 people safely, 25 little houses, a common kitchen, a common bathroom facility area and stuff. And if you go over 25, then your kitchens and bathrooms and common areas get a little overwhelmed. It's just too many people to be sharing. It's like living in a big house as roommates. And each tiny home is a bedroom. But when you walk out of that bedroom into the common area, fenced-in courtyard, you're in your living room. You're in their living room. And it's kind of like how it works. That's the best that I can really equate tiny home villages to how we might otherwise live in rental situations, is being in a big house with a lot of roommates.
And I think we're going to run out of time, so we better take their questions.
Do you think making more hotels would be a solution?
I think that most advocates agree that living in motels is, while that's a good stopgap solution to get people off the street, it's very expensive. It's destabilizing mentally and financially for folks, and they just don't get a chance to get a leg up. They need more help than that. That's private sector renting rooms, and they just can't afford to do that and get the rest of their lives in order a lot of times. Go ahead. I'm out of order, but I'm gonna go ahead and take some hands.
If people come in, do you help pay for them, or do you help get them
Oh,
We often will assess folks and help them with their needs. We're a nonprofit. We get donor dollars come in, and we'll get together as our board and talk about it and say, yep, let's do that. Let's get that person. Sometimes it's getting just somebody off the street who's on a wheelchair or something into a motel for the next few days while they get past their cold or whatever. And we can't afford to do everything, but we try to help people who are in their worst moment and help them over that hump.
and sometimes we have some really nice people who are able to work with somebody who's literally on the street, doesn't have their shoes on, doesn't have their coat on, and they'll help dress them and try to get them warm and try to give them soup.
It's like when you drive around, you just look at people, you look like you need some new shoes. Hey, what size shoe do you wear? And oftentimes people are just like, I wear a 10, man. And it's like, well, I got those for you, or I'll be right back, and I'll bring that to you. Yeah, go ahead. The success of getting out of homelessness. Good question. And certainly Whatcom County and Bellingham have worked hard. They spend, I think probably we're around $15 million a year between those two entities, those two governments. And I'm going to say that we might get up to maybe 60 or so people into regular housing. A lot of people go into supportive housing that's part of a program and fall right back to the street too. But so maybe not even as many as 60 people, but oftentimes it is because families with kids and stuff, and they kind of get pushed through the program because we're not going to let them fail. And with the decision to not let people fail is where we all need to be. Government is the entity that should be responsible for sheltering. It shouldn't be up to individuals, motels, nonprofits, or anybody. We're here to help government take on their responsibility. When you read the preamble to the Constitution, which is the reason the Constitution even exists, it says, the preamble's like one long sentence with a lot of commas, but in there it says, promote the general welfare. The reason why our nation exists is to not let stuff like this happen. And so we need our government to take that on, and we're here to help show them how to do that and work with them. Yes. Oh, I can't hear you too well. With your mask on, there's noise back there. How long until one more time. So it's stopped for good? We need buy-in. We need people. We need governments and citizens to change their minds, change. Again, 80% of what I do, and I do a lot, I'm on the streets, I give out shoes and everything else, and hats and coats, but 80% of what I do is try to change the conversation. When we all change the conversation and accept these people back into our own community, it can happen like that.
And
we
I
actually have so much money available right now between all the governments in our nation, all the different cities and counties have so much money for pandemic relief. The plan that SOS, my group, has put forward, theoretically could solve homelessness in your community within the year. And if we can do it, so can every other city in the nation, which means we can solve homelessness in 1 year if we apply ourselves.
And I actually did see a town, and I've been really watching what they're doing, and they did solve homelessness. They got everybody off the street. I think, I know you have a question, you've been waiting patiently, and I know you need to talk to us, so. They need help, they need doctors, and it's hard sometimes to talk to people with mental illness because they don't believe that they have a problem. So sometimes they're the hardest to help.
They have rights. They have rights to say, no, I don't want service. And so really there's a breakdown of a list of, they have what they call a designated crisis responder. So when you call 911 and have somebody, this person is in mental distress, they'll come out eventually. It takes hours sometimes, and often that person's gone when they get there. But when they show up to that, they have a short list of things that can this person take care of their own bathroom functions? Can they feed themselves? It's a very low barrier, and if they can't do those things, then we might take them without their will. But in most cases, if they're able to even barely function, we'll have to leave them there and wait until they're ready to accept services, because they have rights to deny services. And so that is very difficult.
You know, so one of the articles I think that your class as well as our class read is in the very beginning of this unit, your two articles, and one of them talked about what they're doing in Massachusetts, what they're doing in Utah. They had 3 different states. They talked about how they're attacking the tiny homes for the homeless. And Utah was a state that they feel like they've got it solved, and they put the money into it. They've got the organization, and it's a whole community effort. But that's one state that has proven that this is a sustainable solution to homelessness. Question I have for you is, so one thing that we're going to have to figure out, our groups of kids, is identifying some of those barriers within our community, like who would be people, or who would be some of those agencies that would be resisting having like a tiny home community being established. So we wonder about Lynden. I mean, who would those individuals be that wouldn't want that community to be here? What do we need to be considering?
Neighborhood associations is a great question. Neighborhood associations is where it usually starts. Is where it started in Bellingham when we were trying to establish tiny homes and encampments there. And it took a long time to get the win. But you have community meetings. You talk it out with a group of people, homeowners as big as this group right here, and we all do these questions and we answer those questions. We try to satisfy them. I can tell you some of the stuff that we tell them. And it's the truth. We've had the chief of police come in and talk for us. When a tiny home community comes into your neighborhood, you have a 30% reduction in crime minimum. A great reduction in the garbage laying around. They pick it up. And when all the fears that people have for why they shouldn't come to my neighborhood suddenly become the opposite. And also, once they're in the neighborhood, these same people who had these fears find themselves changing their own conversation in their mind, swallowing their own stuff on that, and baking some brownies and taking them down to the village and meeting the people.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, you've got somebody who's willing to mow your lawn every week for much cheaper than anybody else, And so then you've got community, and that's how that happens. It's very important that the tiny home communities not be shipped out somewhere out in the county away from us. They are our community, and of course they need support from services that are in the community, just like you do. You don't want to have to try to catch a bus to make an all-day trip to go to the dentist, and then maybe lose the stuff you left behind.
Yeah.
So we need to keep them in our community, and that means some here, some there within our community. Yes.
What are some struggles you would face if we put a tiny home village in Lynden?
In Lynden?
Linden's a tough nut to crack. It's a much more conservative town than Bellingham per se. We have homelessness here. People from Lynden go to Bellingham to try to get services often. When they fall into homelessness, it's that unfriendly to them. It's about changing the barriers here in Lynden specifically. It's twofold. There's a lot of messaging that comes from the government that are very proud of what they're doing, and they want to be seen as doing something, and so they like to hold that up. This is what we're doing. But then the messaging becomes a little too far and says, there's plenty of services for everybody, but these people don't want them. And that's not true. It's just not true. And so you end up with community members who like, you know, in chats and Facebook and comments, like, what are these people doing here? There's lots of services for them. They just don't want them. It's just not true. And so they buy that because it's easy. You know, none of us wants to see poop in our backyards. None of us wants to see needles on the playgrounds and parks, right? But so we're so fed up with that we're almost going to buy anything that somebody tells us why we can't have what we want. You know, it's like, well, they just don't want it, so to heck with them, you know. No, and in fact, you know, we need to offer them more of a message that says, these are the rehabilitative services that we can provide. This is the way we can welcome them into our community. They can help us. We need to let them see and know more. It's just about an education, really, to change those minds. But Lynden is a tough one because there's a lot of people here who are kind of stuck in the mindset that anybody who works hard should be able to be just fine.
There's also a phrase called NIMBY, not in my backyard. Right. You had a question?
I know this is kind of off topic, but for the mental illness, like, what if a woman has mental illness and she has kids?
Oh, it happens all the time.
Like, because I know with mental illness, some people aren't the safest. So, would you take the kids away from the woman, or would you try to take the woman?
That's not really the goal. It's usually to keep families intact is the
They try
goal.
to keep families intact, but again, the qualifications that you get people for services means normally you have to hit some sort of rock bottom, including with mental illness. It's not off topic at all. In fact, every topic that we could talk about touches homelessness. Like I said, there's veterans, there's retirees, there's people who are injured, there's people who had legal actions, all of these different reasons why they're out there. But one thing that happens out there when you're out there is mental illness can come to you. Trauma can come to you. You can
Make
be
it
a
worse.
victim in one night and it changed the way you see the world. I mean, don't trust anybody like a dog in a corner biting everybody that comes up. Some people get like that because of the terror they experience in one night, and that's mental illness. What do? You know, the best thing we can do is try to stabilize. I see people come into tiny home villages very mistrusting, you know, and they carry their backpack around them, you know. It's like you're inside a gated village and there's only 25 of us here and a bunch of people watching, but they won't put that backpack down because they know I could lose it. But then after about a day or two, they set it down, their doors are unlocked, they leave the door open. It changes quickly. So it's important to offer services that allow people to heal so that you can quickly then assess whether or not the kids are in a safe space. You know, let's get them safe together as a community and then decide whether she can be alone with her kids right now, later. You know?
Real quick, I'm just going to share, and I saw you had a question, is I, work at Western, and when you work at Western, you have a good job. You have enough that you can pay your rent or your bills or buy a house or whatever that it is that you need to do. Well, there was a woman who was really good friends with my office assistant, and she had PTSD, and it wasn't that long ago, it was last year, and she came to my house to have Tenzing fix her car. And then I found out she had been living in her car. And so I sent our crew, we have like a bunch of people who are, they're in Facebook Messenger, and we identify where people are at and say, can you bring her some dinner tonight? She's in her car, she's afraid of different people, so she'll be at this like location hiding. And they would bring her dinner. And I also asked, can we fast track her into a tiny home? And she's a lawyer. Guys, she's a lawyer, and she's in a nice car, but none of you would know that walking by her in a grocery store, what she was going through, and that she had a PTSD and a mental illness happening. And thank goodness she was only in her car for 3 months. Can you imagine sleeping in your car for 3 months and being 60 years old? Think of your mom or your grandmother doing that, because life happened and you had, you couldn't handle keeping things together. And now she's been living there for over a year and has completely stabilized her life, but she'll probably always live there. She's going to be on disability. She can afford it. And then, and it keeps her safe and sane and around a community. And I'm sorry, I know you had a question, and I think we have to wrap up.
What do you
You don't have to do anything to be homeless. It's just as easy as falling off a log. It's just as easy as wrecking your car and waking up with a confused state one day. It's just as easy as any number of things that can happen to us. Not being able to locate a rental that moment, all of a sudden a family's on the street in a car, then the car gets towed, you are in the ditch with your family. So qualifying, it's kind of, well, how do you qualify for services if you're homeless? That's the trick. And again, there's different levels of barriers that keep people. So we have the people who we might call chronically homeless. There's a lot of drug addiction, a lot of mental health issues in that group. And they are the same faces we've seen for years. Clogging our doorways, tearing up our delicate waterways, garbage everywhere. These people need some help. They don't need us to demonize them and push them further away. Every time we call the cops and say, I want this cleaned up, that's what they do. They say, you move along, we're taking this stuff, get out of here. Basically how it works. They talk like it's more compassionate, but in fact, people are displaced, they don't have their stuff anymore. Now they're out looking for resources, looking for a blanket, looking for a tarp. Taking the tarp right off of your boat because they need a tarp.
Or stealing it from other homeless.
Or walking right into Fred Meyer's, filling a basket, and walking out. And we all like, oh, those are terrible people. It's like, what are they going to do? You know, you can't judge them till you walk a mile in their shoes. I'm not at all advocating for any of those behaviors. I don't want poop in your backyard. I'm an environmentalist first. I don't want to see our rivers and creeks torn up. But these people have to have a place to go, and that's up to us. And we have to do that as a compassionate society. A polite society doesn't let people die in the ditch.
That's a good message. And, our time is